All right. Well, hello and welcome everyone to this monthly edition of Plant-Based Nutrition 101, which is a part of Creating Connection Canada's online offerings. And we invite everyone into forming inclusive and welcoming community committed to authentic conversation, holistic wellness practices, and meaningful activities such as this. Our presenters, as usual, tonight are Janet and Jim Poirier from Collingwood, who bring their personal experience and certified training to informing our knowledge and perspective on a whole food, plant-based lifestyle. So with that, I will turn it over to Jim and Janet. A warm welcome to the both of you.
Thank you very much, Troy.
Thanks, Troy. We are Janet and Jim Poirier from just outside Collingwood in Blue Mountains, Ontario, where we're experiencing winter, a funny kind of winter because we usually have snow here. And the ski hills rely on the snow, but at least they're making it. And the ski hills are very busy right now. We're on the shores of Lake Huron, Georgian Bay. Janet is a retired registered nurse. And since we've been on this journey, she has become certified in plant-based nutrition with the E. Cornell Institute. We consider what we're doing our ministry. In other words, we're here to help, and we don't receive any remuneration for what we do. We just want to make sure that we share our journey and our experience with you. Because Janet does quite a bit of research, we ask that you write down her email address, and we oftentimes carry on conversations for the full month between our meetings, assisting people to find resources and helping them with maybe some health concerns that they may have, and answering whatever questions that we can. I'm along for the ride. My name is Jim Poirier, and I'm retired as well. My claim to fame is that 13 years ago, I had triple bypass surgery. And I was on what we call standard American diet, and didn't bother with what I have to eat. And I developed blockages, and while I was on business in Omaha, Nebraska, and ended up staying in Omaha for a couple of weeks so that I could have the surgery. 2 years later, I had to put in 3 more stents, having basically not changed my diet a lot. And at that point in time, we discovered a book called Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, wherein he proved that you could reverse heart disease with a plant-based lifestyle. So we followed that lifestyle ever since. I lost a lot of weight. I am off all medication. Janet basically cured her severe arthritis, and we are both entering another decade, and we are very active, following the lifestyle, not looking back. And so that's my email address as well. The information that we share with you is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We ask that you seek advice from your health provider with any questions you have regarding your medical condition, especially if you're on medications and are changing to a whole food plant-based diet, and how these changes may require an adjustment in your medication and dosage. It's important to work with your doctor to monitor your condition and medication dosage during your change to dietary practices. Janet? Happy New Year, everyone.
Yes, it is January, yay, 2023, hard to believe. But we wanted to wish you all a happy New Year and a prosperous one, and hopefully a healthy one. So, you know, a lot of times people just say in the new year, that's kind of a trigger for setting new goals and setting, you know, going on a diet. I'm going to exercise, I'm going to eat better, I'm going to do all those things with good intention. And a lot of times those those New Year's goals and thoughts last for short periods of time. So we're saying, how can we make these goals a little bit more substantial and lasting? And so, you know, we are part of some Facebook groups, and I find those groups really inspiring because they give us stories of people, real people who share them, and good recipes and good information. And I was looking at one of the Facebook groups. It was the McDougall Starch Solution group. And this lady, her name is Tammy, it kind of spoke to me because she was speaking about herself and her journey. And I wrote down kind of the points from her story here that spoke to me as might be meaningful to you as well. So she said she was going to focus. She'd been doing plant-based now for a year. She's lost a lot of weight. She feels great. And she says, you know, it took a lot of focus and thinking about her own self-care for both her body and her mind. So, you know, this included diet, of course. It included some exercise, included managing her stress, and, you know, getting into a community feel where she felt comfortable being on that journey. She said she kept her mind focused all year, has focused on healthy living. And she said it's a lot about making the right choices that align with your values, things that bring you towards the attention that you need to put into things to make them lasting. And also, she said she concentrated on making it a commitment. And so committing to something, you're kind of making a promise to yourself that you're going to rely on, first of all, your willpower, but, you know, what you learn along the way to maintain your focus and to keep you on the path. So she also set milestones, set goals for herself, and she celebrated those goals as she went along. She celebrated the success that she achieved. And she made slips, of course, and we're human, everyone is. So she said, I didn't punish myself too much. I got back up when I had slips and I tried again. And she is now enjoying the benefits of a healthy lifestyle, which means she's healthier. She's more able to enjoy her life and the goals that she has outside of just eating, you know, living with her family, you know, sharing, you know, travel experiences and being a part of the world in a way that she never thought she would. So I find too, I love, you know, willpower is one thing, but developing a why power to me is really more sustainable. Learning scientifically why these things make sense to you, why, you know, we would talk about this, or why we would even go to look into what is a whole food plant-based lifestyle. So learning more helps to secure a stronger will, so to speak, a stronger desire to maintain and to start seeing those promises that you make to yourself come true in what happens to your life. So those are just some thoughts that I took from her story, and I was very impressed by it. And I just thought I'd like to share that. She also shared this little, it's not like a poem, sort of like a poem, but she entitled it Choosing You. So she said, who are you becoming? How do you want to show up in this life? Align with what you value. Listen to what makes your soul sing. Heal, love, discover joy. Honor yourself. Commit to the work and show up. Walk in your truth. Create your life and define your legacy. So let's think about that as we proceed tonight with the rest of the evening.
Okay, so what are we talking about when we talk about a whole food plant-based lifestyle? The term important to examine here is the word whole, and that describes the foods that are minimally processed, including whole grains, fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, legumes and beans, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. A whole food plant-based lifestyle is much more than a diet. It includes diet, yes, exercise, managing your stress, and love in community. And we hope that we're part of your community and we support each other in reaching the goals, because living a whole food plant-based lifestyle is not easy. We've had many people come into our house, and over the few years that we've been doing these Zooms, who just can't get into this lifestyle. It is, we find it's very easy, but to change the way you eat, and you have to eat 3 times a day, is very difficult for a lot of people who are quite frankly, in many cases, addicted to some of the salt, sugar, and fats that are available in the processed foods, and that's what's making them sick. So our goal is to help you move to a whole food, plant-based lifestyle, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, legumes, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. We often say, and we've heard it said by a number of the doctors who deal with us, it's not what you're giving up, it's what you can eat. And so within that, we're going to talk a bit about and give you a whole pile of recipes tonight, and sources to get recipes to help you do this. And it's not viewed as a short-term punishment charged by guilt. It's not a set of complicated meal plans and sacrifices. It's simply a return to whole foods, rich flavors, natural health. That's it.
So we like to share this pyramid. It gives you, a lot of people say, well, how much of everything should I be eating? I'm not sure. So if you look at this pyramid, it kind of splits everything up into sections. So you see the bottom of the pyramid is the larger section, and that includes all the fruits and vegetables that basically you want. And the more variety, the more color you include, the better it is. So that's a very large group. The next level up is about whole grains. So you're wanting to get several servings of whole grains in. That's oatmeal, barley, wheat, all those varying grains. And there's some unusual grains that kind of fit into that category as well, like quinoa and amaranth and millet and farro, different grains that you may not be so familiar with. But when you start to look around at what the options are, there's more variety than you might think. That you might have been eating as a normal standard American diet. The next level up is legumes. So you should be including some legumes, some beans, split peas, the lentils, that kind of bean. And there's many, many different kinds. It doesn't matter, but you should be including some beans, also leafy green vegetables. So this chart gives you an idea of the amount of servings, so 2 to 3 servings of leafy greens, but that could be more. This is a very rough kind of chart because a lot of these vegetables and fruits are very lower calorie than you would be getting if you were eating a standard meat diet. So you can eat more of these, get a wide variety, and some of everything. At the very top of this pyramid is the high-fat whole foods, which would include avocados, nuts, and seeds. They're a little bit higher in calorie, but they're also nutrient dense as well. But you don't need nearly as much of those because they carry a lot more fat and they carry a lot more calories. So you're being careful about the amount of those foods you're getting. At the bottom, you'll notice that it says to make sure you're including a vitamin B12 supplement, because this is an important vitamin that is present in soil, not so much in the food itself, but present in bacteria. It's from dirt. So we do need, they say you need a pound of dirt in your life. Well, this is maybe one of the ways to think about it, that we're getting this through, we wash our food so well these days that we're typically washing off some of those potential good bacteria that we might have gotten some B12. So they encourage taking a supplement, and that's the easiest and safest way.
There's something not included here.
Oh, it's not included there.
Potatoes.
Oh, yes. Well, in the category of vegetables, yeah, potatoes are there. They are a starchy vegetable. So it includes all starchy vegetables and all non-starchy vegetables. So potatoes, sweet potatoes,
Rice. No.
that's a grain. Mostly sweet potatoes and potatoes are the ones that we think of when we think starchy, and you can include those into that vegetable category.
They make you full.
They do. They
Make you full, so you're not hungry all the time. Like when I first went on, I thought, well, all we need is salad, but that's not the case. And there is minimum quantities in this pyramid. The only ones that you really have to watch how much you eat is your high fat whole foods. Everything else, just plow it in, and we never count calories, but we try to include these fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, leafy green vegetables, basically in every meal. They give you all the essential nutrients that you need. And we're going to talk about protein and calcium because those are the biggies, but we'll talk about that as we go through.
So the next slide, and we'd like to include a bit of some videos that are pertinent to the topic that we're sharing, and it also introduces you to people that you may not be aware of. So we're going to share this. I think some of you may have already seen this, but it's still worth looking at. Julianna Heever is a registered dietitian. She is in California. If you wanted to visit her website, it's plantbaseddietitian.com. And she has a lot of information. She actually has written several books. She has a podcast called Choose You Now. She's got a lot of things going on. But I liked this little video because she kind of reinforces what we just talked about in the food pyramid. So if Troy, would you mind playing that for us? It's about a 6-minute video.
So with our uncomfortable jolts out of the way, I want to spend the remaining time with an overview of recommendations on how to round out the nutrition on your plate. Like I said, that list that I love, I want you to eat a diet of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in infinite tasty combinations. Here's one example of what an overall wholesome diet can look like, full of color, variety, and balance. Everyone agrees, the USDA, the American Institute for Cancer Research, the Harvard School of Public Health, half your plate should come from fruits and vegetables. Approximately a quarter of a plate, or I like to say about 1 to 1.5 cups per day, should come from legumes. That's beans, lentils, peas, hummus should be a food group, and then soy foods like tofu and tempeh. Whole grains like quinoa, rice, and oats can substantiate your meals for satiety and culinary diversity. And finally, fat should come from whole food sources such as nuts, seeds, and avocados, and it should be used sparingly. But there's an abundance of evidence showing cardiometabolic, weight management, and other advantages of consuming 1 to 2 ounces or 30 to 40 grams of nuts and seeds a day. I do advise minimizing or even considering eliminating the use of oils, as they are 100% pure concentrated fat with minimal nutrients, no fiber, and it makes weight management more challenging, which is what most of my clients come to me for. But even if not, it's still something that you want to consider. Cooking and baking without oils is so easy and so practical with just a few tweaks in the kitchen. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics put out a position paper, the last position paper in 2016 on vegetarian and vegan diets. It's important to note that appropriately planned vegetarian diets, including completely plant-based or vegan diets, are considered nutritionally adequate, healthful, and may provide health benefits for all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, older adulthood, and for athletes. In 2 books ago, this Plant-Based Nutrition Idiot's Guide, I've since written the Health Span Solution, and I am finishing up my next book, which is due on Monday. So that's what I've been busy with. That's coming out in December, the Choose You Now diet. In here, we talk about like all the nutritional needs for the details from pregnancy to seniors and athletes and all of that. And if you're a healthcare professional out there, if you need some information to bring to your healthcare professional, here are 2 peer-reviewed journal articles that I've authored in the healthcare journals and medical journals that can be downloaded online for free. So I think those are really good resources because they're very well referenced, and I think that helps when you're bringing this information to your physicians because a lot of them have a lot of questions. But basically, with a little bit of mindfulness on some key nutrients, here are all of the extraordinary benefits of a summary of the extraordinary benefits of eating a whole food plant-based diet. It's the only diet that's ever been shown to actually reverse advanced stage cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And plant-based eaters have also been shown to have lower BMI and body fat, lower overall mortality and mortality from ischemic heart disease, reduced medication requirements. I always say results are typical. I've worked with hundreds of clients, and every single time it's so exciting because they get off their or they lower their medications, not all medications. I just, obviously this is, talk to your healthcare professional, but it's very common to stepwise off of blood pressure medications and high glucose medications, and things that we were taught in graduate school could never be possible. Like once you were on those medications, it was for life. But I consistently see my clients getting off of them just by switching to this diet. So I love to say results are typical. We also see sustainable weight management, reduced incidence of hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and hyperglycemia, reduced risk of certain cancers, and a reduced obesity inflammatory markers risk. A plant-based diet supports living longer, not just living longer. So how do you see nutrition? Do you see it as fuel, as biochemical mechanisms, or as beauty and flavor on a plate? Clearly, all of these matter, but we've ensnared food in such a complicated web of social and technical bias that more often than not, people just see it as confusing, contradictory, overly obfuscating messaging. John Lubbock says that what we see depends mainly on what we look for. All too often, this means our own personal biases are confirmed. These come in education, media, and even social circles. Everyone has an opinion on food. And with all of the contradictions, some of these opinions must be inaccurate. If I could leave you all with one simple message, it would be to look beyond what you hear and read about nutrition. It may be much simpler than it seems. And I'm confident that if you make an effort every day to eat more servings of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in tasty combinations, you will see positive results. As we've seen, this may be due to the health promoting properties of plants, as well as those foods that are displaced off the plate by an increased reliance on these plant source foods. You don't need to begin at 100%, and remember that every bite matters. After 16 years, personally, I can say my blood panels have been great. I feel great. My weight has been easy to maintain. I feel more energetic than I did in my 20s or my 30s. The best kept secret in medicine is that when left alone, the body often heals itself. Thank you for listening.
So that's Julianna Heever. She's got some interesting books. Julianna has the Choose You Now podcast is really interesting. She does that about once a week. And I would encourage you to check that out if you're liking podcasts. She has some interesting guests, and she talks to them about their journey and, what is speaking to them. Oftentimes she's interviewing doctors, dietitians, people that are in the business with her. So it's really interesting. Another site where you might investigate a little bit of what Julianna was talking about, what it would be nutritionfacts.org. And this is Dr. Greger. He has a lot of videos and talks. You can either read it as a transcript or listen to him. And he has one that's called the Daily Dozen. And on the Daily Dozen, he talks about what you should be eating in a day. So people that are wondering about how to manage their daily intake, that's a good place to look. And it can be helpful for many, but you can look up any topic on nutritionfacts.org and you will find any topic that you want to put in there. You can find information about. He's very much into science and official scientific studies and research that stands behind what they're talking about. So it's really good to use him on a regular basis if there's any questions about any topic that you're interested in. On the soy, it is a higher fat content bean, but still very nutritious, even in tofu, and you can use that as a bean, one of the beans. without getting into too much trouble with the volume, because typically, like, we would have soy a couple times a week, maybe, tofu in dishes.
And we drink soy milk.
And we have soy milk in when we put on our oatmeal, or you can use that in baking. But yeah, it's nutritious, and soy is a beneficial being for various reasons that we could talk about a little bit later.
Soy gets a bad rap. They're in this month's, we just got it. It's called Good Medicine. It's published by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. When you donate to the Physicians Committee, you get the magazine. And so we get this magazine a few times a year. And we just got it yesterday, and they quoted a study that vegan diet rich in soy reduces the troubling hot flashes by 88%.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't cause cancer.
No, it in fact has been found to prevent recurrences of breast cancer if you include soy in your diet, or tofu or soybeans. So it's cancer preventative, really protective. But there have been studies or thoughts about soy being, because it has a phytoestrogen. It's not exactly like your human estrogens act. It's actually a protective type of estrogen within the soy that is good for you. So countries that include a lot of tofu and soybeans in their diet have relatively small amounts of cancers present in those populations. So that's a good one to actually look up in nutritionfacts.org. If you want to read more about soy, he's got a lot of good articles and videos about the soy. So I'd recommend looking it up there. Also PCRM that Jim just mentioned, PCRM.org is Dr. Neil Barnard's site, and you can look up articles there on soy. PCRM.org, which stands for Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine.
They're a lobby group out of Washington, D.C. as well. So they have done a lot of lobbying, and they deal with many of the issues state by state, even in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're very much into animal protection, animal rights, animal testing, preventing that from being too much. So let's go on here now to some of the myths that still exist around food. As Julianna Heever had mentioned, there is still a lot of, let's say, controversy if you get into discussions with people about various things about food, and everyone has opinions. But some of the myths that are very prevalent is that we need meat to get enough protein. Another one is that you need to have milk to get calcium, and you need fish to get omega-3. And basically, number 4, carbs are bad for you. So we're going to talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. First of all, we know that proteins are important. So they are building blocks. There are amino acids that are present. Some are essential, some are non-essential. The 11 non-essential ones are made by the body, but we do need to eat the 9 essential ones. So those are found present in our food. So proteins are important for cell growth, repair, and development. All proteins come from plants. They don't come from animals. The animals eat the plants. Their body produces the meat, but it's all because of the plants that they eat. So we're told that we need about 0.8 milligrams per kilogram of body weight of protein daily. So depending on your size, whether you're male or female, whether you're big or small, you might require, on an average, 45 to 55 to 60 grams of protein per day. And if we eat enough calories, so an average person would eat around 2,000 calories of food per day. If you include that 2,000 calories just with plant foods, colorful plant foods, you will automatically get enough protein without eating any meat products at all. or animal products or dairy. We're going to look at a short little video. I think it comes next from Dr. Greger. This is the Dr. Greger I mentioned, nutritionfacts.org. And we're going to listen to him talk about plant protein versus animal protein, because many of you might think that animal protein and bean protein would be the same, but he's going to talk a little bit about the differences that exist.
In 2019, Dr. David Katz and colleagues, including one of my favorite researchers, David Jenkins, published a public health case for modernizing the definition of protein quality. The prevailing definition seems to have more to do with biochemistry than the net effects on human health. The popular concept that protein is good and the more the better, coupled with a protein quality definition that favors animal protein, fosters the impression that eating more meat, eggs, and dairy is desirable, preferable. But this is directly opposed to nutrition guidelines that are instead trying to push more plants. Although protein malnutrition is still prevalent in many areas of the world, it is exceedingly rare in the industrialized world, where the most formidable public health threat is not something like kwashiorkor, protein-calorie malnutrition, but from chronic diseases. In 2016, a landmark study was published out of Harvard involving more than 100,000 people that found that replacing animal protein with plant protein was associated with lower risk of dying prematurely. The worst seemed to be processed meat like bacon, as well as egg protein, the egg whites, but swapping in even just 3% plant protein for any of the animal proteins, processed meat, unprocessed meat, chicken, fish, eggs, or dairy, was associated with a significantly lower risk of, arguably the most important endpoint of all, death. Yeah, but how do we know it's the protein? The researchers adjusted for factors such as saturated fat intake, which suggested it wasn't just the animal fat. OK, but how does your body even know the difference between protein from a plant and protein from an animal? I mean, isn't protein protein? No. Unlike animal protein, plant protein is generally low in branched-chain amino acids, for example, and decreased consumption of branched-chain amino acids improves metabolic health. It could be the IGF-1, a cancer-promoting growth hormone that is boosted by so-called high-quality animal protein intake, though. We suspect the IGF-1 connection is cause and effect, since people who are born to have higher IGF-1 levels, regardless of what they eat, do appear to suffer higher rates of killers like type 2 diabetes and heart disease. Or it could be something the Harvard researchers didn't control for, such as toxic pollutants like dioxins and PCBs, since they tend to accumulate up the food chain in cattle, pigs, chickens, and fish, and therefore end up on our plates. So plant-based protein also stands as an important step to lower the body burden of harmful pollutants. If you don't think 100,000 people are enough, how about 400,000 people? The NIH AARP study is the largest diet cohort study in history. And again, simply swapping 3% of calories from various animal protein sources with plant protein was associated with 10% decreased overall mortality. And you get even twice that benefit if you get rid of eggs, too. That's not a surprise, since egg consumption is associated with a higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease. Put all the studies together on dietary protein intake and mortality, and people who eat more protein tend to live shorter lives, but this is mainly driven by the harmful association of animal protein. Plant protein intake is inversely associated with mortality, meaning those who eat more plant protein tend to live longer lives. More animal protein may mean more mortality, whereas more plant protein is correlated with less mortality. So the best of both worlds would be to increase the intake of plant protein in place of animal protein. In other words, as another 2020 meta-analysis concluded, persons should be encouraged to increase their plant protein intake to potentially decrease their risk of death.
So that's the type of thing you're going to get from Dr. Greger on any topic that you can imagine, and some that you can't imagine. So it's worth looking into. Another little video that we're not going to share with you, but it is a video from Dr. Neil Barnard. If you wanted to look it up, Troy could share that in the chat. It's from the exam room with Dr. Neil Barnard. It's called Ending the Vegan Protein Debate. So it's about a 10-minute little video, so it's a bit too long for us tonight, but it's an interesting one, and it kind of highlights a lot of the myths that exist, including he talks about protein and calcium in that video. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. This next slide that we're sharing here shows the comparison between 100 grams of beef and 100 grams of beans.
It's not there.
So we're looking at the protein content. We're seeing very similar amounts of protein available in the same amount of beans or beef, but we're also looking at the amount of fiber. Now, we learned that a plant-based diet really gives us the fiber that we need, and fiber is the thing that's missing from meat altogether. There is no fiber found in meat. I will see the iron content is higher in the beans than the beef. The calcium a lot higher, 123 milligrams to 16 comparative to beef. Magnesium, 171 milligrams compared to 16. And we've got magnesium much higher, and the cholesterol is really 0 in plants. And within the beef, we've got 74 milligrams of cholesterol. We see the difference in price. So when people talk about the fact that, eating plant-based is more expensive, we're seeing quite a difference in cost from including beans as your protein source, main protein source, over meat. And also the effect on our environment is huge. So this compares the usage of water to process or get 100 grams of beans, 103 liters of water, whereas it's 1,480 liters of water for the beef. So the actual effect on through animal agriculture, land use, the processing of all these foods, there's quite a variation there. But you are getting good food value in the beans as well, along with the other nutritional benefits.
These prices do not take into effect the recent inflation.
Yeah,
but still, it's even more skewed in favor of the beans now.
it is. So myth number 2, you need to have dairy for calcium. So we've learned that this isn't the case. We really require about 1,000 milligrams of calcium, 1,000 to 1,200 as we age. So they say anybody, a senior would need slightly more. But all these minerals, including calcium, come from the soil. We eat foods that come from the soil, the plants, the animals eat foods that come from the soil, and they produce calcium in their body from the soil. Calcium is important to get. It's important for functioning of the brain, your heart, your muscles, all of your body required, and for bone development as well. Some good plant sources of calcium include beans, tofu, leafy green vegetables, broccoli, nuts and seeds. Some of the nuts and seeds that are higher in calcium would be sesame seeds, chia seeds, almonds. Some of the milks, the plant-based milks, have been fortified with calcium. So a cup of plant-based milk would have about 300 milligrams of calcium. If you're using that on your oatmeal or your cereal in the morning. Some of the other sources would be oranges, molasses. It's present in most foods, but in smaller amounts and larger amounts, so that it all hopefully boils down that you're getting anywhere around 1,000 milligrams is the preferable amount to get. So we're going to look at another short video from someone else that I would recommend getting in touch with or getting to know is Brenda Davis. Brenda Davis is a Canadian registered dietitian. She's been plant-based for over 40 years. And she started eating plant-based when it wasn't fashionable within her profession to do so. And so we're going to listen to Brenda talking about how to get enough calcium in your diet.
In June 2020, this study from the peer-reviewed medical literature on bone fractures in vegans from the EPIC Oxford study looking at a cohort of British vegans, the second largest study of vegans in human history, found that British vegans have higher rates of bone fractures. This is something we need to be taking very seriously. It is worth noting though that in the original EPIC Oxford study, researchers found that when vegans were getting more than 525 milligrams of calcium a day, they did not have higher rates of bone fractures. Frustratingly, the plant foods that contain some of the highest amounts of calcium actually have the lowest absorption rate due to oxalates. And so many vegans who consume large amounts of spinach, for example, think that they're getting enough calcium when in fact they're not. Taking in enough calcium on a whole food plant-based diet actually takes a bit of careful planning. So let's hear from Brenda Davis, a registered dietitian, on how to get enough calcium on a plant-based diet.
So how can we get enough calcium? So we see calcium in legumes. We see it in dark green leafy vegetables and broccoli and almonds and tofu and figs, chia seeds and sesame, tahini and molasses. So we want to also select calcium fortified non-dairy milks and other foods possibly with added calcium. It's a lot easier to get your 1,000 or 1,200 milligrams of calcium a day if you use a cup or two of fortified soy milk or almond milk or whatever, because these milks provide about 300 to 450 milligrams per cup. So 1 or 2 servings will get you to about 600 to 900 milligrams without doing anything else. So it just makes meeting needs very, very simple. And I wanted to illustrate this by showing you a child menu with 1,000 milligrams of calcium. So they're eating tiny little amounts, but we're still getting the 1,000 milligrams of calcium. So oatmeal with berries, a cup of fortified milk, and a tablespoon of chia seeds. And then they have a whole grain muffin for a snack, and then a peanut butter and banana wrap for lunch with some, veggies and cashew dip. And then for a snack, they have a smoothie that includes a cup of fortified non-dairy milk. And then dinner is black beans, quinoa, and broccoli, and some chocolate pudding made with non-dairy milk. And they're at the 1,000 milligrams. So it's not that difficult to achieve. I want to talk just very briefly about calcium bioavailability, because this is really important. We actually absorb about 32% of the calcium from dairy products. And that's a reasonable amount. We absorb almost that much. It's about 31%, but it's about the same from tofu that's made with calcium. We actually absorb about 20 to 25 or 30% from things like sweet potatoes, legumes, soy milk. But the foods we absorb the most calcium from are low oxalate greens. So things like broccoli, kale, Chinese greens, turnip greens, mustard greens, we absorb about 40 to 60% of the calcium from those foods. And of course, those foods are also sources of vitamin K and magnesium and potassium and vitamin C and all of these other nutrients that are so critical to bone health. Greens that are high in oxalates, we absorb very little calcium from those foods. So spinach, beet greens, Swiss chard are really good examples of that. And we might absorb 5, maybe 10% in some of these. Calcium is bound to oxalic acid, and so it isn't available for absorption. Now, some people have asked me, well, what if I make a salad with spinach and kale? Will the spinach prevent the absorption of the calcium from the kale? And the answer is no. There's enough calcium in the spinach to take care of the oxalates that are there. Now, there are factors that inhibit calcium absorption, and negative impact comes from oxalates or phytates. And so these things we need to be aware of. Phytates are concentrated in wheat bran, so you don't want to be sprinkling bran over your food. Excessive sodium causes you to urinate out calcium. A high acid load, so a meat-based diet, can cause you to lose more calcium. Alcohol, caffeine, both can cause you to urinate out more calcium. And then positive impact we see with vitamin D and with adequate protein. If you consume 1,000 milligrams of calcium all at once, you'll absorb just maybe 15%. But if you eat little bits in foods over the course of the day, you'll absorb a lot more. The most calcium concentrated legumes would be tofu, tempeh, soybeans, navy beans, white beans, great northern beans, and black turtle beans. In the vegetable category, it's the low oxalate greens. In the fruit category, it's dried figs, oranges, and grapefruits. So they will contain maybe 50, 60 milligrams of calcium per fruit. Grains, the best calcium sources are amaranth and tortillas made with calcium. And in the nuts and seeds, almonds, chia seeds, poppy seeds, and sesame seeds tend to be the winners.
So Brenda said a lot in there very quickly, but she did cover some interesting things. The study that she mentioned at the beginning of her talk was that, there is a prevalence or perhaps more than we would hope for fractures in people that are plant-based. I've heard different discussions on that because, people were kind of alarmed from that study. However, there's been discussion, from Dr. Neil Barnard, the one that I mentioned before, who talked about they've examined people, the differences between people, a plant-based eating person as opposed to a meat-eating person. A lot of times plant-based eaters are more slim. If they do fall, they have less padding for their fall. So that's one of the reasons why they anticipate that, like when you don't have much protection over your bone when you're slim. It is a matter of making sure you're getting adequate amounts of calcium from your food. So you have to kind of be cognizant of that. And I found that with, the information about choosing the low oxalate greens doesn't mean that spinach and beet greens and Swiss chard are bad for you. It means that they have lower calcium absorption, but they are loaded with iron, they're loaded with minerals, they're loaded with vitamins. So to say I'm going to exclude those, we still eat spinach, beet greens, and Swiss chard.
Well, we eat it like crazy because it is better for the lining of your arteries. It makes them more pliable, allows the blood to flow, reducing the possibility of blood clots and hardening of the arteries and those kind of things. So,
but you must include, broccoli and kale and the ones that they mentioned, turnip greens, other collard greens, very high in calcium. So, and kale, including some of those along with these other greens, it's beneficial. And the greens are the ones that all the dietitians tell you to be really eating more of, and include the spinach, beet greens, and Swiss chard as well. They are full of nutrition. Including a vitamin C rich source is they find helpful when you're eating calcium rich greens. So if you're having a big salad, throw on some red peppers, sweet peppers, some tomato, things that are more concentrated in vitamin C, and this will help the absorption of calcium as well. Including
we even have our salads where we have like mandarin oranges or orange pieces in our salad.
Yeah, so just throw in those highly nutritious vitamin C rich foods along with those meals. As Brenda Davis says, including these bits and pieces throughout the day, you're going to get a variety. You're going to spread it out over the course of the day, and you will absorb those nutrients a lot better than taking, say, a one-time dose. Making sure you're getting enough vitamin D. Vitamin D we're getting from the sun, but if you're not getting enough sun, they recommend taking a vitamin D supplement. Usually 1,000 to 2,000 international units is the recommended amount. So, but you can get vitamin D assessed through a blood test from your doctor if you want to see where your levels are. Brenda Davis talked about avoiding the highly acidic foods that would be in meat and dairy. And this can cause actually your bones to leach some calcium out because your body's trying to neutralize that high acid load. And it does that through breaking down bone. And plants are generally more alkaline in nature. So if you're eating a highly plant-based diet, you're much more alkaline. you're much less likely to cause leaching from your bone to neutralize that. So that's on the
So
list.
milk doesn't build bones.
No.
Matter of
And-
fact, it leaches.
Yeah,
Calcium.
it's more highly acidic as well. Dairy is highly acidic as well as animal foods. And also using some weight resistance. Walking is a good form of a weight-bearing exercise. Are there any questions on the calcium? Anything with the calcium that we've been discussing? I think Brenda did talk about it well, even though she speaks fast as well. So it's hard to get it all
Someone
in.
did have a question in the chat. Alicia was asking, due to a medical condition, they cannot break down raw or cooked leafy greens and broccoli. So their nutritionist suggested veggie protein powder. Any thoughts?
There's various thoughts about protein powders, and the doctors will say it's not out of the question, but they are also made from the plants. So I'm not sure if this person is unable to digest even cooked raw vegetables. Raw greens sometimes are more difficult to digest than a steamed green. So people that do have trouble with raw find it easier to steam them and eat them that way, and they're still quite acceptable. You still absorb the nutrients from them if you don't overcook them. But protein powders, it's you don't typically need to supplement with a protein powder if you're eating a broad variety of vegetables. You're getting the proteins that you need. But yeah, if there is the odd situation where you have to adjust, then you can. I think Dr. Bernard talks about the fact, he talks about protein powders in that video that I suggested Troy share in the chat with you, and you could look that up. But it's not recommended, and it's not required unless you have a problem. Otherwise, that's been mentioned. Dietitians are good to work with you on figuring out. It may be just, one or two, and you could substitute with the ones that you're not reacting to. Just a matter of finding that out and going through the process. And it's kind of a grueling process. Someone who can recommend, if you need to take a protein powder supplement, they may be able to recommend something that they like or they find helpful for some people. So the other myth that we've all heard is that, well, if I need omega-3s, I need to eat fish. So there is a lot of controversy, and there is, for the environment as well as health, there are lots of discrepancies in discussion about eating fish. So we're going to listen quickly to Dr. McDougall. He's going to talk about, do I need to eat fish for omega-3s? So let's hear Dr. McDougall. He's at drmcdougall.com if you wanted to look up his website.
After the protein myth, which is you have to eat meat to get enough protein, and after the calcium myth, which means you have to eat enough dairy to get enough calcium, comes the omega-3 myth. And that is you need to eat fish to get essential fats, to grow your brain, to be healthy, to have a normal pregnancy, etc. You need to be eating fish fat. Well, let's take a look at that recommendation for a minute. Omega-3 fats, what this means is that somehow a metabolic process has been able to remove some hydrogen at the carbon number 3 position. In other words, 1 carbon, 2 carbons, 3 carbons. At that position, what we cause is a double bond. That's why we call it omega-3. Only plants have the ability to cause that to happen. Only plants have the ability to take the hydrogens away at the carbon 3 position, to create a double bond at the carbon 3 position. Only plants. So how in the world does a fish have all this omega-3 fat? The fish ate algae or seaweed, which made the original omega-3 fats. Okay, so the fish does concentrate a lot of this fat in its body fat. Is that good or bad? Well, it could be good in some ways. It acts like a drug. It thins the blood, which may reduce your risk of forming a blood clot, which leads to a heart attack. But ladies and gentlemen, it thins the blood. And if you get in an accident, you're more likely to bleed to death with all that thin blood. It suppresses the immune system, these omega-3 fats do. And if you have an inflammatory arthritis, it can reduce this swelling and the pain associated with the arthritis, but it suppresses the immune system, ladies and gentlemen, the whole immune system. As a result, you cannot defend yourself against cancer or infections as readily as you would if you didn't include these in your daily regime. They suppress the immune system. They're also pure fat. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. And when biopsies are done of fish eaters, we find that they're full of omega-3 fats when we look at their body fat. Now, that's just part of the problem with deciding you're going to get your omega-3 fats from fish, as opposed to the original source, which is the plants, which is what you ought to be doing. Other problems that are associated with that are the fact that fish are bioaccumulators of dangerous chemicals. What happens is the fish, they come along and they eat the seaweed and they eat the algae, and on this seaweed and algae is a small concentration of environmental chemicals produced by industry, primarily factories. And these get into the water, the ocean, the rivers, the lakes, streams, et cetera. And they get on the plants, and the fish comes along and eats the plants. And because these chemicals are fat soluble, these chemicals are concentrated in the fish fat. Maybe a 500 or 1,000-fold, they're concentrated in the fish fat. And then what happens is a bigger fish comes along and eats the little fish. And because you have to eat a lot of little fish to keep the big fish going, you end up taking a large amount of these chemicals. And so you further biomagnify the dangerous cancer-causing, brain-damaging chemicals that are in the environment. And then, of course, we're at the end of the food chain, and we end up eating the fish. So you end up with a tremendous amount of environmental contaminants. And probably the most notable of them is methylmercury. Methylmercury is very toxic to the body, particularly to the kidney system. And you can determine how much fish a person enjoys eating based upon the methylmercury levels in their body fat, in their bloodstream. You can tell how much fish they eat. It's a direct relationship between methylmercury and fish consumption. Those are just some of the concerns. In addition to it being high fat, which is going to make you fat, that extra fat makes you diabetic. Fat causes the body to develop insulin resistance, paralyzes the activity of insulin, contributes to diabetes. Fish oils, they contribute to cancer. Yeah, these omega-3 fats, not only do they suppress the immune system, but in other ways, they contribute to cancer development. So you end up with a whole bunch of health problems. Also consider that fish has no dietary fiber. So it's not going to contribute to a large, healthy bowel movement. But one of the biggest concerns that I think you should have, and I certainly have as a grandfather, and you should as a parent, is the fact that the fish are almost gone. I've been interested in the ocean my entire life. I've been a windsurfer, an ocean-going boat sailor. I've enjoyed scuba diving. I've just loved to listen to the waves, live by the ocean during part of my life. The ocean is very important to me, and I've always wanted to show it to my children. And I've had an opportunity to do that. But will we have that same opportunity for our grandchildren? It's in question because 90% of the fish that were present when I was a young boy are gone through overfishing, through bycatch. The fishing industry certainly needs some regulation, which is unlikely to come because of the finances involved. But you as an individual can make a choice. You can understand that the downside of eating fish is far, far greater than any benefits that you might accrue. Stick with a healthy diet, which is a starch-based diet with the addition of fruits and vegetables, and leave those little fishies alone. I'm Dr. John McDougall.
So Dr. McDougall, yeah, drmcdougall.com. You can look up different articles from Dr. McDougall. And if you go on Dr. McDougall's site, he has what's called the McDougallers. So if you want to learn, if you want to listen to people's stories, he's been doing his work for over 40 years. So he's looked after thousands of patients. And the stories that people tell, he has documented on his website. They're called the McDougallers.
I'm especially grateful to Dr. McDougall because, as he said, have a starch diet. That was the starch diet was the second book I read. It's called The Starch Solution by Dr. McDougall, in addition to Reversing Heart Disease by Caldwell Esselstyn. And that's what really saved my life going into this, because I needed volume, and the volume comes in the starch. And so that's why I eat a lot of potatoes and sweet potatoes and corn and those kind of starchy vegetables, because they're satiating and they provide nutrition. They have protein, they have all the nutrients that you would need. And they give you that bulk that you need to make you feel full. It's if you can get onto Dr. McDougall's website, please do, and look at all of the other things that he talks about with regards to his version of a plant-based diet, which is heavy on the starch.
Mm-hmm. So if we look at what plant sources are good ones to get our omega-3s, first of all, we don't need very much. We need very small amounts. So you're going to be needing about 1.6 grams of what's called alpha linoleic acid, or ALA, for men, and about 1.1 grams for women. So if we look down at this little chart at the bottom, not really a chart, but it's a tablespoon of flaxseed contains about 2.4 grams of omega-3s in itself. An ounce of chia seeds contains 5 grams. An ounce of walnuts contains 2.6 grams. So if you don't need very much, adding a little bit of nuts and seeds to your food during the day, you're going to be getting a large amount of omega-3s. A lot of what I've learned over time is it's important to have a ratio, like a high ratio of omega-3 to the other omega fats that are omega-6s, omega-9s, that are more inflammatory. The omega-3s are the least inflammatory of the omegas in your diet. So having mostly omega-3s as your nut choices is better. There's a lot of fat in other types of like processed food, meat and dairy. They're very, very high in omega-6s, which means they're much more inflammatory to the body. And omega-3s are much more calming of the inflammation in your body. So getting a little bit goes a long way. They're also available in some of the green leafy vegetables, which you wouldn't normally think about. Also, beans contain small amounts. So if you're getting all this broad variety of fruits and vegetables during the day and a little bit of nuts and seeds, you're most likely getting enough omega-3 fats to do the job. So our last myth, number 4 myth, carbs are bad for you. And we've all heard this. It's probably sparked the keto diet craze, that people have just gotten away from eating carbohydrates. But yes, some carbohydrates are bad for you. We learned that all plant foods have varying amounts of carbohydrate, fat, and protein. And animal foods have no carbohydrate whatsoever, nor do they contain fiber, which we need desperately for our gut health. Carbohydrates can be found in simple sugars and refined foods such as white sugar, white flour, and glucose really is the body's preferred source of energy. So your cells all require glucose to function for the brain, your muscles, and your central nervous system. Simple sugars like refined white sugar and refined grains absorb very quickly into your bloodstream. So if you had a slice of white bread or a donut or a piece of cake, those would be defined as carbs that might not be the best choice. They are the ones that are bad for you. the more refined you make a flour, the more refined you get your sugars down to a pure white cane sugar. What you don't want to do is to spike your blood sugar quickly. This is called what they would have a high glycemic index. So those sugars, those refined simple sugars, spike your blood sugar very quickly and send your blood sugars soaring. But if you eat more complex carbohydrates, these complex carbohydrates in a sweet potato, in grains, in beans, in nuts and seeds, they're full of fiber, which means they're absorbed much more slowly and cause much less of a blood sugar spike. So these would be considered low glycemic index foods. And that's basically all whole foods because they come with vitamins, minerals, water, fiber, all this nutrient density in those foods make them absorb so much more smoothly to keep your blood sugar stable, no spikes up and down. It just kind of rides along in a nice even keel. So, choosing these whole foods, plant foods, will keep your blood sugar on a nice steady pace. And all those carbohydrates that are present in our plants are good ones. So our last little video for today is going to be a short one from a dietitian who I've not heard of, but I really, really liked her story. And I'm going to have Troy share that.
Hi, I'm Mike Pellegrini from WatchMojo.com and president of L'Equipe Train with Mike. Today we're here with Jasmine Godusi, our nutritionist, and we're here to debunk the myth that all carbs are bad. So let's start off with the most basic, simple question. What is a carbohydrate?
Basically, a carbohydrate is something that could be found in almost any food that we eat, as you can see over here, with the exception of fat, like oils, and animal protein. Otherwise, any other food is going to contain some degree of carbohydrate. Carbohydrates can be divided into 3 different subcategories. So we have the simple carbohydrates, which are otherwise known as sugars. We have complex carbohydrates, otherwise known as starches, and we have fiber. Basically, the sugar and the starch are broken down into glucose molecules, which is the main fuel for our body. Fiber basically is the main structural component of fruits, vegetables, grains, and legumes. It doesn't provide us with any calories, but it gives us the bulk that we need for our diet.
The question that a lot of people ask themselves with all the information and misinformation going around is, do we actually need carbs in our diet? And if we do, why do we need carbs in our diet?
Our central nervous system, our brain, and our muscles run on glucose throughout the day. So if you're not consuming enough carbs, basically you're not feeding your brain and your muscles with enough fuel. You'll end up feeling tired, sluggish, you won't be able to concentrate at work or at school, and you won't have enough energy throughout the day to do a workout or just to do your normal daily habits. So a lot of people who are following low carb diets or very low carbohydrate diets are basically losing weight just because they're simply cutting out foods, which means they're cutting out their caloric intake and they're burning more than they're consuming.
Okay, so you're saying there's the reason why people are getting results with these no carb diets or very low carb diets has nothing to do with the fact that they're cutting out carbs, it's just that they're reducing their caloric intake.
That's right.
They could be cutting out anything and still be getting those same type of results.
Right. One thing that worries me about following diets like this is that people are cutting out whole food groups. So carbohydrates, that's, like I said, that's what our body is running on, and it's not sustainable over the long run to cut out whole groups of food for a long period of time. So what's going to happen after somebody follows this type of diet for a few weeks or a few months and then goes back to a different type of eating pattern? Their weight's going to come back on.
So we're talking about carbohydrates and choosing the right carbohydrates, because we now understand there are some carbohydrates that we definitely need and should be eating in our diet, and some carbohydrates that we shouldn't be eating at all. We hear about the glycemic index as a tool to help us decide that. Our clients often ask about this. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what it is, the glycemic index, how to use it, and what is its pertinence.
Basically, it's a ranking system, and it ranks foods from 0 to 100 based on how quickly the food will cause our blood sugars to climb. So in general, if we look at the foods that we have over here, Foods that we would want to avoid that have a high glycemic index are typically ones that are made from refined flour, and that would include things made with processed and refined grains, and that would include white flour, like this white baguette we have over here, pasta made with white semolina, white rice, and these crackers that are made basically with white flour. Those foods are going to cause that big rush of blood glucose and then the big crash afterwards, and we want to avoid that. Foods that are better to choose are whole grains. Here we have some quinoa, we have some chickpeas, which are legumes which tend to have a very low glycemic index and are very healthy, packed with nutrients. We have a sweet potato. A lot of people have the misconception that a sweet potato, because it's sweet, would cause a rush of blood sugar, but actually it has a low glycemic index and is a very healthy choice.
What about the talk about the glycemic load? Okay, how does that factor in here? What is that all about?
Glycemic load considers the quantity of food and basically looks at it in a quantity of about 100 grams. So for example, if you look at just the glycemic index chart, you'd see that watermelon, for example, has a high glycemic index because it is very sweet. It has a lot of sugar in it, natural sugars. But if you look at the glycemic load and you have a bowl of watermelon, it actually doesn't cause your sugars to raise up that quickly because it is diluted in so much water. So that's also something that's very important to consider, because some foods that have a high glycemic index may have a lower load.
So Jasmine, what are some simple changes that people can make to their diet to incorporate some of these good carbs that we talked about today? And obviously, everyone's concern, how they could also still, get their weight loss goals, get their fat loss goals incorporated.
And I'd like to explain to people that one slice of white bread versus one slice of whole wheat bread, they weigh the same, they actually give you the same amount of calories, which is important to know. But in terms of nutrition, it's completely different. It's like black and white or brown and white. So what the brown bread is doing is that it's giving you fiber. It's a whole grain if you're choosing 100% whole grain bread. And basically, like I explained before, when you're eating it, when you're consuming it, you're not getting that big spike of blood glucose that we would get from having the white bread, which is actually rated on the glycemic index ranking as 100. It's very high. It's ranked right up there with pure sugar. So that's something that we would want to avoid.
So now that we know that not all carbs are bad for us, we can go out and make some better choices. Update your shopping cart. For more information about nutritional facts or to seek out the help of Jasmine, our nutritionist, come visit us at trainwithmike.ca.
I found that really a good little summary. When people say carbs are bad, you know differently. You know that there are some good ones, and we rely on those. Any questions about anything we've talked about tonight?
Well, marketing is really something that can really change people's opinion of the food. There's very, very powerful forces there that market their goods and services with advice that may not be totally true. So it's a misconception. It's one of the myths that a lot of people have.
It's the studies on, it's going back to the protein as well. Animal protein is found in fish as well. So and we've been all told over our years that, the more protein, the better. So people always thought, okay, I'll choose the healthier protein in choosing fish. But it's the protein, that's studies that Dr. Campbell did to indicate that animal protein it actually increased your incidence of overall mortality, and incidence of cancer, incidence of heart disease was associated with animal proteins. And Dr. Greger talked about that in the first video that we showed you about the difference between plant-based and animal protein. So it's a common thought that fish are healthy and that you get omega-3s, and this is why it's such a powerful myth. And industry, as Jim says, has driven the maintenance of it. But our oceans are getting fished out, and the toxins that are present in the water, is all coming through that animal protein.
I couldn't get through the documentary Seaspiracy. It talks about the fish industry and how terrible it is in terms of the fish that you get on the shelf. If it's a farmed fish, especially salmon, the conditions on those farms are somewhat like the conditions on animal farms. So if you can, it's on YouTube. It's called Seaspiracy. There's one called Cowspiracy. Those two, I wouldn't eat them. I wouldn't eat them. I wouldn't watch them in one sitting because it's really
Even just the
it's
amount,
eye-opening.
the amount of bycatch that Dr. McDougall talked about, there's so much, they use these nets to gather up everything in sight, and they'll pick out the certain parts of those fish that they want, and everything else dies and goes back into the ocean. So it's hard. And that this all comes out within that.
It's hard to watch, but
documentary.
worth watching, but it's hard to watch.
It's eye-opening. Yeah, it's eye-opening. And knowing that you don't need that, you don't need it to get the nutrients that you're looking for. So we don't need to eat them. A lot of times people ask for recipes. And I thought, rather than just for your interest's sake, or if you've got a camera and you want to take a snapshot of these lists of websites, there are so many recipes available through many sources, and a lot of the times these sites, they have information, they have recipes, they have lots of other things as well. Some of them are more just recipes, but they're divided into soups and stews, desserts, main meals, salads, dressings, sauces. So you can look up whatever you're looking for, or even just to browse through. Sometimes you'll see something and think, oh, that sounds really good, I'll try that. You will find things that help to inspire how you cook in the kitchen. And a lot of those recipes are just for, I find them good for reference. If I want to change a spice, I do. If it calls for oil, I leave it out. Or I substitute something else in its place. A lot of these are very much whole food, plant-based, no oil sites. And so they give you a lot of tools to work with, and lots of help. Yeah, there's so much information. The one thing that I didn't talk about too, that I wanted to talk about tonight, and I was just looking at this last night in this PCRM book that came out to us. It's called One Healthy World. It was started in 2022. They're doing another session in 2023, which hasn't started yet. But this whole 2022 is on demand. So you can go on, you see pcrm.org/
Too fast.
pcrm.org/ One Healthy World.
That's a /.
Okay. / One Healthy World. Capital on the O, capital on the H, capital on the W, but the One Healthy World is all one word. And you can register for this and see it. There's 6 sessions. It's interesting because they have reached thousands of people in 182 countries. They do it in English, French, Mandarin, and Spanish. So it's really broad spread, and the information is fabulous. Even aside from the audio presentations, if you go down on that website, once you look, you'll see articles on various topics that are really, really helpful. So it's a really big learning opportunity for people to check out.
Oh, there it is.
So One Healthy World, if you go down, you'll see what I was just saying. There's the classes, and you can watch on demand. So if you hit watch on demand, they all come up, and these are the speakers It's excellent. I did watch some of those last year, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do this year, but they're talking about it returning this January with a global panel of nutrition experts, doctors, culinary specialists, and guest speakers. So yeah, it should be good.
So you register, Troy's got the part there where you would register with your
You
name.
could put your name in there, and you could probably register for this upcoming. They did all of these live that you could have joined, but then you could see them afterwards. If you missed something, you could get it recorded, but they did it on live. So you could actually converse with them. You could send in questions on the chat. It's just like a Zoom call. So it was really well done. So if you click on that watch on demand, you'll see the different sessions that you can pull up. There they are. There's 6 different sessions with different topics. So just something for your knowledge, and yeah, have fun with that. Physicians Committee does a lot of good work. And the Exam Room podcast is another one through Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. So if you look up Exam Room podcast, where you get podcasts, you can just YouTube it. And they have lots of good discussions from different people. And it's excellent.
For those of you that have not joined our Facebook group, Plant-Based Nutrition 101, join our group and share the conversation on an ongoing basis as well.
Well, Jim and Janet, I'm just going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and then we can be free and open to share and chat and have our sort of more personal question.